Welcome to another deep dive. We've got a really interesting mix of stuff you guys sent in this time, all about green labs, basically making scientific research more sustainable. And we're pretty excited to dive in. We've got an opinion piece advocating for making sustainability part of training for scientists, an editorial about the smart and green laboratories history, a whole review on green analytical chemistry, a guide for how to make clinical labs more sustainable, and we've even got something looking into certifications for green labs.
Well, there's going to be a lot to cover.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty wild ride, I think, through this whole world of eco friendly science.
Yeah, it's great though. I mean, this is such a critical topic, and this huge amount of stuff you guys have sent in just goes to show how many people are realizing that science has an impact on the environment. And, it's kind of a weird thing, right? Like, we need scientific research to figure out environmental problems, but then doing the science in the labs makes those problems worse.
Yeah, it's definitely something we need to be more aware of. And speaking of being more aware, you will not believe this one stat that was in one of the commentaries we got. Labs can use like 3 to 6 times more energy per square foot than a regular office building. I mean, can you imagine? It's like they're 10 times bigger based on how much energy they use.
Yeah, that is startling for sure. And it makes you think even more about the equipment they use in those labs. Like one little ultra low temperature freezer that can use as much energy as a whole house. And then there's fume cupboards. Those things use the same amount of energy as like 2 or 3 houses in a year.
So, are there energy vampires hiding in our lab? I'm going to look at all our equipment totally differently when I get back to the lab. It's like an eye opening experience.
For sure. But the good thing is the commentary by Joseph B. Lopez and his colleagues, they don't just point out the problem. They actually give some ideas for what we can do about it. Like one thing they say is we need to cut down on all the waste from testing. They say we should get rid of tests that are outdated or not really needed. And get this, they say we should question why we always use a bunch of sample tubes when we could probably just use one.
So, basically, break those habits that we don't even think about anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when you hit reply all on an email. You gotta stop and think, do all these people really need to see this? Or in this case, do we really need all these tubes? Yeah, and it can actually make a big difference. There was this case study in Lopez's paper where one lab got rid of 600,000 tubes just by switching to these single serum separation tubes. Imagine if every lab did that.
That's incredible. Just one simple change, making that much of a difference.
Exactly. And there's a lot more we can change too.
Well, reusing and recycling stuff can really help too. Like reusing specimen bags and urine bottles can cut down on waste a lot. And some labs have even gotten these special machines to recycle xylene and formalin right there in the lab.
So they don't even have to send it out to be recycled?
Nope. And it saves money in the long run too, even though the machine costs a bit to buy it first.
So it's win-win for the environment and the budget. So we've talked about reducing and reusing, but what about the equipment itself? I read this amazing article about all these new systems that are super energy efficient by Siemens. They found it could cut costs by 30% and make way less waste. It really shows how innovation can make a real difference here.
Totally. It's amazing what they're coming up with, and it's not just about the big fancy equipment either. Even just changing how we use lighting can help a lot.
Oh yeah, like switching to LEDs.
Exactly. Plus, using motion sensors so lights only turn on when someone's there and just remembering to turn the lights off when you leave.
You got it. These little things might not seem like much, but when you do all over the lab, it adds up.
It all adds up for sure. And speaking of adding things up, there was this opinion piece by Sherry Scott. It really made me think about the bigger picture. She makes a really strong argument for why we should teach people about sustainability right from the start when they're learning how to be scientists.
You mean like in university and stuff?
Exactly. Imagine if every scientist knew how to work sustainably right from the beginning of their career,
Yeah, that would be huge. It would totally change how we do science.
right? It would be like second nature to them. And Scott even talks about these cool educational programs like Education for Sustainable Development or ESD. And then there's Sustainability and Quality Improvement or SQI, which is specifically for healthcare. It makes you think about how we could use these kinds of things to teach sustainability in all sorts of different science fields.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And, training the next generation is super important, but we also got to think about all the labs that are already out there and how they work.
For sure. It's not just about individuals, it's about institutions, funders, and suppliers too. They all play a role.
And speaking of changing how we do things, I was really fascinated by the review on green analytical chemistry.
Ah, yeah, Kayla Billiard and her team.
Yes, they really go deep into that whole thing, and it's not just about making little tweaks here and there. It's about totally changing how we think about chemical analysis. It's about choosing chemicals that aren't as hazardous, using way less solvents, or maybe even none at all, and finding new ways to do things that make less waste. There was this one example that really stood out to me called solid phase microextraction, or SPME, and it used way less solvents and makes way less waste. It's amazing how much they've been able to change things.
It really shows how powerful these green chemistry principles can be.
You can do things more sustainably and more efficiently at the same time. And this focus on sustainability isn't just in individual labs or for specific techniques either. There's this whole movement towards green lab certifications.
Like avaito standardise andre vart labstat are doing things der riktway.
Exactly. And that's where this article by Martin Farley comes in. He talks about programs like My Green Lab, where labs can get different levels of certification like bronze, silver, gold, all the way up to platinum.
So it's a badge of honor showing how committed they are to being sustainable. That's a great way to motivate labs to do better.
It really is, and it makes you think about where this is all headed. Could these certifications become mandatory one day? Like maybe it would be like health and safety rules where every lab has to meet a certain standard?
That's a really interesting question. I think it would definitely make a big difference, but it would also be a huge change for the scientific community.
For sure, there are definitely pros and cons to think about.
Yeah, for sure. But, the fact that we're even having this conversation shows that things are moving in the right direction. I mean, more and more people are realizing how much of an impact science has on the environment. And the scientific community is starting to take responsibility for that.
It's great to see that shift happening.
And it's not just scientists and lab workers who are pushing for this change either.
Oh, that's right. There was that third EFLM strategic conference.
That's the one. And it was all about smart and green laboratories. It brought together all sorts of people, scientists, industry experts, even policymakers, all focused on figuring out how to make labs more sustainable in the future.
Exactly, and there was this great editorial by Thomas Osmond about the conference, and he talked about how we need a strategic vision for lab services that thinks about cost effectiveness, clinical effectiveness, and of course, environmental sustainability.
Yeah, we got to consider all three.
Exactly. And to do that, we need everyone to work together and be innovative.
It's about breaking down those walls between different parts of the science world.
Yeah, exactly. And finding solutions that are good for science and good for the planet.
It all ties back to what Sherry Scott was saying about education. Imagine a future where sustainability is just part of how we do science from the very beginning.
That would be amazing.
It would be.
Well, on that note, I have a question for all of you listening. What's one thing you can change in your own work, no matter how small, to make less of an impact on the environment?
Let me think. Maybe you could switch to LED lights. Oh, or try to use less water, or even just choose to buy from companies that are really committed to sustainability. It's important to remember that even small changes can make a difference.
Every little bit counts.
Exactly. And the more we all do those little things, the closer we get to a more sustainable future for science.
And a healthier planet for everyone. Now, before we move on and talk about some specific strategies for making labs more sustainable, I want to bring up something that I think is really important but doesn't get talked about enough. We spend a lot of time talking about how labs impact the environment. But what about how the environment impacts the work being done in those labs?
Well, that's an interesting way to think about it.
I think so. We've been so focused on making sure labs don't hurt the environment that we haven't really thought about it the other way around. Like, think about climate change, for example. We've got rising temperatures, extreme weather events, all sorts of stuff. And those things can directly affect scientists doing field work, collecting data, even just keeping the lab environment stable.
You're right. It's like sustainability isn't just something we should do because it's the right thing to do. It's also something we need to do to make sure we can even keep doing scientific research.
Exactly. And we can't forget about how we're using up all the Earth's resources. Like if we run out of water or important minerals or even energy, that's going to have a huge impact on labs and slow down scientific progress.
It's just a scary thought when you really think about it.
It is. It makes you realize that sustainability is about more than just reducing waste. It's about protecting the very things that science needs to keep moving forward.
It makes me think about those Green Lab certifications we were talking about earlier. Martin Farley, in his article, he seems to think that they should be mandatory. Kind of like how we have rules for health and safety.
I can see how it would be good to have everyone on the same page and make sure all labs are meeting a certain standard. But I also wonder if it would be too much for smaller labs that might not have the money or resources to do everything right away.
Yeah, that's a valid point. It might be better to do it gradually. Maybe we could start with incentives to encourage labs to go green and then slowly over time make the rules stricter.
That sounds like a good compromise that way. Labs of all sizes would have time to adapt.
Exactly. It's kind of like learning a new skill. You wouldn't expect to be an expert overnight. It takes practice, guidance, and support to really get good at something. And just like scientists need the right training and resources to do experiments, we shouldn't expect labs to become sustainable without health and guidance.
That's so true. I love that analogy. It reminds me of that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So instead of just telling labs what to do, we need to give them the knowledge, the tools, and the resources they need to become sustainable on their own.
Exactly, and that brings us back to the importance of working together.
Like at that conference we were talking about.
Yeah, remember Thomas Osmond's editorial about it? He emphasized how important it is for scientists, industry experts, policymakers, and funders to all work together.
It's like we need to combine everyone's knowledge and resources to create a system where scientific research can be truly sustainable.
Precisely. And speaking of funders, imagine if when scientists apply for grants, they had to include a section about how sustainable their project would be.
Like how much energy they would use, how they would handle waste, that kind of thing. That would be a really interesting change. I think it would make a big difference.
It would definitely make researchers think more carefully about the environmental impact of their work.
For sure. And it would show them that sustainability is really important.
Exactly. It would be like saying this is a core part of doing good science.
And it's not just about researchers and funders either.
Right. We need suppliers to step up too. They need to start making and selling lab equipment and supplies that are more environmentally friendly.
Like using recycled materials and things like that.
Exactly, and making sure their packaging is sustainable too.
So it's about changing the whole market to make it easier for labs to be sustainable.
Exactly, you know how it works, supply and demand.
Right? If scientists want to buy eco-friendly products, companies will make them.
That's the idea. And it's not just about what happens in the lab either. As consumers, we all have choices to make. We can choose to support companies that care about the environment. It's about making conscious choices that reflect our values.
And those choices go way beyond just the lab.
Absolutely. Sustainability is a way of life, not just something you do at work.
It's about thinking about the impact of everything we do.
From the products we buy to the energy we use to the waste we create.
We all have a responsibility to take care of the planet.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, even small actions can add up to make a big difference. Whether it's cutting down on your own energy use, talking to your colleagues about sustainability, or just spreading the word about how important green labs are, everything helps.
Absolutely. We all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable future.
And every step we take towards sustainability is a step in the right direction.
Well said. You know, it's funny. It's like we've been so focused on figuring out how to make labs sustainable, like all the practical stuff, right? The steps to take, the certifications, that we kind of forget why we're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the details, but it's really important to step back and think about the ethics of it all.
Exactly. Like, how do we make sure that making labs greener doesn't accidentally create new problems?
Right, like inequalities. All this new eco-friendly equipment and sustainable materials, that stuff can be expensive. We don't want to end up in a situation where only the labs with lots of money can afford to be sustainable.
Yeah, that wouldn't be fair. It would leave all the other labs behind.
Exactly, and we also have to think about the global picture. Are we just shifting the environmental burden to other parts of the world by relying on manufacturing and resource extraction in countries that don't have strong environmental rules?
That's a really tough question.
It is. And I think researchers and institutions need to be more open about where they're getting their stuff and how it's made.
Yeah, it's not enough to just make our own labs green.
Nope. We have to think about the whole life cycle of everything we use.
It makes me think about something we talked about earlier, how the environment can actually impact the research being done. Like if we're studying climate change, but our own labs are contributing to the problem, it makes you question the whole point of the research.
It's like a doctor who smokes telling their patients to quit.
Exactly. It just doesn't have the same impact.
Beyond just the science itself, there's the bigger question of social responsibility. Science is part of society, right? So we have a responsibility to think about how our actions affect everyone.
So it's not just about reducing our carbon footprint or minimizing waste.
Nope. It's about making sure that what we do as scientists aligns with ethical principles, like justice, equity, and making sure everyone has a good quality of life.
That makes a lot of sense.
And as we've been talking about, that often means changing the way we think. It's less about focusing on individual achievements and more about recognizing that we're all connected. We all have a shared responsibility to take care of each other and the planet.
It makes me think about mentorship and science. If senior scientists and lab leaders really care about sustainability and show it in their work, that sets a great example for younger scientists.
For sure, actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. And it's not just about individuals either. Institutions need to create a culture where ethical behavior is valued just as much as making big discoveries.
Absolutely. It should be rewarded too.
So it's more than just checking off boxes on a Green Lab certification,
Right. It's about really understanding why sustainability matters,
and how it connects to the whole purpose of science.
which is ultimately to make life better for everyone to improve the human condition.
Wow, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. We've covered so much from practical tips to some pretty big philosophical questions.
It's been great exploring all these ideas with you.
And for everyone listening out there, we hope this has inspired you to keep learning about Green Labs and sustainable science.
Remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Every step we take towards sustainability is a step towards a brighter future for science and for our planet.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in creating a more sustainable world.